I'm so excited because in today's episode, I'm going to talk about some of the things that led me to getting diagnosed with ADHD. And I know that this has been a really big thing on social media, such as YouTube, but especially TikTok, with a lot of women coming out and saying that they got diagnosed with ADHD at 30 and 40 and 50. And it's so amazing to me and so inspiring to see women advocating for their health. That is why on today's podcast episode, I wanted to share my story of how I found out that I had ADHD at the ripe age of 23 years old. So a few months ago, I decided to go and seek help because I was having a lot of problems. I was finding that, especially around like the luteal phase of my cycle, which is the phase that's like right before your period, I would experience some pretty extreme symptoms. And it got so bad to the point where I thought I might have had autism. The reason I thought that I had autism is because I was experiencing some pretty strong aversions to things. For example, like bright lights in grocery stores and sounds, which I later found out all of those things were due to my ADHD and social anxiety, but we'll get further into that as we go into the episode. And I eventually decided, that I didn't have autism because I took a diagnostic test and found out that like I had maybe like 0.2% of the symptoms for that. But I knew that something was off and I just couldn't figure out what it was. And then, like most people find out, I was scrolling Instagram one night and I was having just a grand old time. And this random Instagram popped up on my feed and it was just like the ADHD urge to do blank, blank, blank. And for a minute, I leaned forward and I was like, wait, I do that. And so I decided to go to that person's page and scroll through their content. And when I tell you that I did like 85% of the things that was on those reels, I decided that maybe I might have ADHD. And a little bit of backstory for me too is that I actually have a sibling who has ADHD, and I spent most of my school years watching them grow up and watching their struggles with school. And so because of that, I kind of always figured that there was no way that I could have ADHD because I didn't have a lot of the symptoms that my sibling faced. And now I'm just now figuring out that ADHD usually presents differently in women than it does in men. And so a lot of the symptoms that they were facing was from a different form of ADHD and a whole different subtype. Now, if you talk to any of my friends in college, they will tell you that they got a little bit annoyed with me because oftentimes I would just not pick up on jokes. So like we would be in a conversation and somebody would say something, and because I was like so far off thinking about other things, I wouldn't know what they were talking about. And I used to always think that maybe I was just slow or there was something wrong with me. And now I know that it was my ADHD kicking in real strong. For some reason, there was something about college that exacerbated all of the symptoms that I had in a way that I've never seen before.
Editing me here, so I just wanted to pop back in and give you some information. For a lot of people with ADHD, they do really well for the first 12 years of their life because they have that external pressure and external structure that keeps them well-rounded. Like for me, having deadlines gave me enough dopamine to get the task done that I needed to get done. But in college, when I no longer had those strict deadlines or anybody pushing me or the structure, that was when I fell apart and saw that with my symptoms. So for a lot of people, they might find that they did all well throughout high school, middle school, elementary school, and college, but then when they got out on their own, then things would fall apart.
This brain fog would often come, like I said, at the luteal phase of my cycle, and sometimes like during the end of my ovulation phase of my cycle. And it was so bad that for a while I thought that I might have like PCOS or something because I would just lose my ability to function for about a week. And it was kind of a scary thing, but it was something I figured out that maybe I would just have to deal with until I started hearing voices. Now, I hesitated on talking about this because I didn't want you guys to think that I was like crazy or anything like that. When I talk about voices, what I mean is that I would have a lot of overlapping thoughts. So my brain at any part of time would be like a bunch of thoughts all together, mixed in with random pieces and parts of songs, often two songs that would be like mixed parts together. And then on top of that, I would have like the thing that I was trying to focus on. And having this running dialogue in my head 24/7 made it so hard to focus when anybody was talking. And especially if they said any song lyric at any point or any word that went to a song. Like if somebody said independent, I would immediately get the words of the INDEPENDENT. Do you know what that means in my head? And then I would lose focus on what that person said for a good 3 to 5 seconds. It was definitely one of the most frustrating ADHD symptoms that I had because I wanted people to know that I was listening, but my brain just wouldn't sit still. The next thing I had was losing things. Now, I still lose things to this day, but I've gotten a lot better at putting things certain places so that I don't lose them. But like 3 to 5 times a day, no lie, I swear, I would lose my phone, my keys, and my glasses. At one point, I remember I lost my phone and I spent a good 2 hours looking for it all around the house. I was a human tornado as I went around tossing off the couch cushions and looking for it. And you know where I ended up finding it at? In the refrigerator. And the funny thing was, whenever I would find my stuff, I would always remember exactly what I was doing when I lost that thing. And that day, I believe I was taking in groceries and I had a lot of stuff in my hands. And so when I put the food away, I think I accidentally tucked my phone into the refrigerator. And that was kind of the first time that I knew something was a little wrong. The next thing I had was horrible procrastination. But this procrastination is different. Like, I feel like there's the normal procrastination you have where you don't want to do anything at all. You just want to lay on your couch and you like bed rot. That's normal procrastination. But this procrastination was different because I didn't know what exactly was the thing I needed to focus on or what was important. It was almost like I had way too many tasks to do and I didn't know how to organize them to figure out which one was the most important. And there was a lot of things where like they were urgent and I needed to get them done, but then I also had other things that weren't as urgent but that were also still important. And so because I couldn't figure out like how to prioritize my items, I just ended up doing nothing at all. And it ended up getting to the point where I would be super stressed because I would have like 15 tasks that I needed to do that were due that same night because I had waited a week to do them because I couldn't figure out where it was supposed to fit into that like laundry list of things that I had to do. And I actually did figure out a method of how to deal with this. So comment down below if you want a video of how I like organize my life now, because I've definitely changed since then. Next ADHD symptom I had was a lot of unfinished projects. So as you guys know, I published my first book back in 2022, but when I had an idea that I was going to be a writer all the way back when I was 7 years old in 2007, and between the time of 2007 and 2022, I had over 150 unfinished projects. And one of the things about ADHD is that we tend to be very big picture thinkers. And so I would have all of these ideas and they would be beautiful and voluptuous and big. But then as soon as it came time to narrow down like the small details, like the character developments and their backstories, I would get overwhelmed and then I would quit. And I did that until finally in 2022, I decided that I was actually going to settle down and get serious about what God wanted me to do. And that's when I finally published my book. So this next symptom is something that really bothers me, but I think it's important to talk about. So I read a statistic that said that people with ADHD are 35% more likely to get in car accidents than their non-ADHD counterparts. And for me, this was definitely the case. I just found the whole process of learning how to drive to be very difficult. I couldn't understand how I was supposed to check my blind spot while also keeping a good distance between the person in front of me, while also trying to keep my focus on the road. It was just so much to focus on all at once, and I was a little bit overwhelmed with the process. In fact, even after about 4 to 5 months of practicing, when I went to take my driver's test, I barely passed. In fact, the lady told my mother that I almost didn't pass because when I was coming out and was about to turn outside of the center, I didn't look both ways long enough, and that there could be somebody who was angry and who didn't see me and then who would hit me, and it would be my fault. And so after that, I practiced a lot before I was really comfortable on the road. And then in 2022, I believe, I had my first car accident. And I was living alone at the time, and I remember that there was a really slow 18-wheeler in front of me. I was rushing, trying to get to my phlebotomy job on time, and I decided that I was going to go around this truck. I checked my blind spot, but then when I went to cross over into the next lane, another car had sped up into my blind spot, and I ended up hitting them. And that was my very first accident. The officers cited me for an improper lane change, and then only a few years later I ended up getting the exact same improper lane change ticket, only this time I had slipped into a slight ADHD brain fog while I was driving due to tiredness, and so it was a little bit of a different situation. The next ADHD symptom I had was constant job switching. I remember looking back at my resume, and in a 2-year time period I had switched jobs about 6 times. It always happened about the 6-month mark where I would be in a job and then I would just get bored of it and realize that it wasn't for me. Now looking back, I realized that I was chasing that dopamine hit, and that was the reason why I kept getting all of those jobs. But it was very frustrating to me at the time without a diagnosis, not knowing exactly why I was moving on from these jobs. Another symptom that I had was promiscuity. I don't know how to say it. Basically being promiscuous. So before I went to college, I remember watching this video of a girl, and her dad had gave her a promise ring, and so she decided that she was going to stay abstinent until marriage. Seeing that video, I decided, man, I'm going to be abstinent until marriage too. And so I went to college, and I lasted about 3 weeks. And looking back, I really wish I could just give myself a hug, because I know that I was struggling with that dopamine addiction and I had no idea. And I thank God, because he was really out there and he protected me from so many different things that I could have got. And then I officially lost my virginity, and it was one of the biggest learning moments for me, and that was when I decided that I didn't want to do such a special act with just anyone anymore. And up till now, it has been about 3 years, and I have maintained my abstinence. Another ADHD symptom that I had was falling asleep when bored, and this is actually one of my recent and scarier symptoms. And so what happens is, sometimes if I'm doing something, like I'll be like watching a video or cleaning up or something like that, if I get like really bored all of a sudden, my nervous system does this thing where it immediately detaches from that thing, and it's like taking a power cord out of a broken computer. And so in college, there were many times where I had professors who I thought were not that interesting, and I would be awake one minute, then all of a sudden I would wake up and I would have my head on the desk, and then the bell would ring and everybody was gone already. It didn't matter how much sleep I got the night before. It didn't matter how much gum I chewed. It didn't matter how interested I was in the subject. As soon as I got the littlest bit bored, I would fall right asleep. And it also was embarrassing because I knew that I was probably snoring. And the last ADHD symptom that made me want to get checked out was that I had some odd school behaviors growing up. One of the biggest one being that I would read everywhere. So I was one of those kids who was always carrying a book, and I got in trouble in class a couple of times in middle school because I would put my fiction novel inside of my textbook, and I would be reading my fiction novel while the teacher was teaching. And there was a couple of times where she came up and she realized and she took my books away, but that really didn't stop me because I didn't care at that point. I also would come home from school with writing all over my arms and all over my pants because doodling was the only way that I could stay focused for that period of time. To this day, I really think that the school system is not meant for people who have ADHD and autism, because I, as an adult, can barely sit still for 8 hours and focus on something. So to expect a kid to do that is just asinine and insane. So I noticed that I would have a big tendency to get really focused on what I was doing. And whenever that happened, I would forget about everything else. And a lot of times this would lead me to like drop my food on myself. I specifically remember I was part of this group at one point, and they had this like special time where they wanted us to like talk to each other, and they brought food for us to enjoy. I didn't want to talk to nobody. I was very much a lone wolf at that point. And so I decided that I was going to sit in the corner and read my book and eat. And well, I guess while I was reading, I was dropping crumbs everywhere and I didn't notice it. And the people pulled me aside and had a very serious conversation with me about how it was unattractive that as a girl I was sitting there and dropping crumbs all over the floor and not paying attention. And it was kind of one of the lowlights of my life at that time. So all of these symptoms came together, and they were what made me decide that maybe I should go get checked out. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of getting diagnosed as a woman with ADHD, because it's a whole situation in itself. So about 2 years prior, before I turned 23, I went to my doctor because I was having depression, suicidal ideations. I was just not feeling well in my brain, and I wasn't really able to focus. And I remember I wrote down a whole list of my symptoms and brought them to my doctor, hoping that they might send me off to a psychiatrist so that they can maybe help me to get the help that I need. Well, instead, the doctor diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder. And to this day, that diagnosis makes me really angry, because I feel like it's kind of a catch-all term to where the doctors can prescribe you a whole bunch of medicines and then not send you to a psychiatrist. I believe that all anxiety has a root. Like most people, they don't just wake up in the morning anxious. And I feel like that was what my doctor got for me when I told her all the symptoms that I had. Anyway, she put me on a SSRI. I was on the SSRI and I felt like I had no feelings at all. I was always numb, and it didn't matter like what happened to me. I had no reaction to it. And it was almost scary because it felt like I was in that luteal phase, brain fog, 24/7 every single day of my life. And I also found out that I was having like a medicinal smell that I didn't like. And I specifically remember one day I went to a group meeting and I went to the bathroom. This is really embarrassing. I'm wondering if I should tell this story, but basically I had peed, flushed the toilet, and there was this girl that had went in behind me, and she was like, oh my gosh, like her pee smells so bad. And you know, I had kind of smelled it before, but I realized that the medicine that they had given me was coming out in my urine. And so I went back to my doctor and I told her like, hey, I don't think this SSRI thing is good for me, and I got off of the SSRI. And so I already knew the second time around that going through my general health doctor was probably not going to be the best option for me. I don't know if you guys know this, but many of the people who get diagnosed with ADHD get diagnosed as kids. And even with getting diagnosed as a kid, the waiting list can be anywhere from 6 months to 3 years long. It's a very expensive process as well. And so I did a lot of research. I saw this website that said that they had great reviews, they took insurance, and there was no wait, and basically you could pay $150 and go to a diagnosis appointment with somebody who was a licensed psychiatrist. And so I was like, maybe this could be an option for me. And so I took my $150 and I put it down and I waited. And during that time, I made up my whole list of symptoms of what I had been facing over the past whole lifespan, really. And the day of the diagnosis appointment comes, and this site was all online, so they didn't have any offices to go through, which I think is one of the reasons why their prices were so affordable. And I logged on and I waited, and I was kind of having a little bit of anxiety because for my whole life I had been told that basically I was like perfect, I was a smart girl, like there was nothing wrong with me. And I was so afraid that this person was going to tell me that it was my generalized anxiety disorder coming back again to like kick me, and that was the reason I had all these symptoms. But what I faced instead was one of the best experiences I've had in healthcare. The person was so kind and so nice, and as I told them everything that I was experiencing, they were like, wow. And then at the end of that appointment, I got diagnosed with inattentive ADHD. Wow, I'm just still remembering that moment of when I logged off the call. Like, I was so elated to finally be taken seriously by someone. And I don't really want to go into this, but I have had many experiences in the healthcare as a woman where I felt like they never took me seriously or really heard me out. And so to be heard by someone about my mental health was like just such an amazing experience. And so I know you guys are probably wondering, like, what happened after you got diagnosed? Like, did you get on medication? Did everything just stop? And no, that is not what happened. So after I got diagnosed, I actually went into a sort of depression. I had this idea for this podcast about like ADHD and including it in Single Out for about like 5 months, but I just needed some time to process everything. I was angry, first of all, because I knew that there was a chance that this had been missed, and that this was the reason why I was on that plan in elementary school where I got extended time on all of my assignments and assessments. And I was also upset because I was thinking, like, what if I had known that I had ADHD when I was a kid? Maybe I wouldn't have been so relentlessly bullied in school because I was different from everyone else. And I was just also shocked. And even after talking to my sibling, like, it was when I finally realized that, like, yeah, this was something that was going to be with me for the rest of my life. I decided not to get on medication right away because I had a negative medication experience in the past. I was on a medication for some other health issue that I had. My sibling at the time was also taking medication for their ADHD. And so one day our pill bottles got confused and I accidentally took their medicine. And when I say that was the calmest day of my life, literally I was relaxed. All of the multiple thoughts went away, but I also found myself doing puzzles. I literally sat down for about 5 hours working on a puzzle, and it was so frustrating because I had other things to do, but the puzzle was the only thing that I could focus on at that moment. And that was my first experience of what my life might be like on ADHD meds, and so I got kind of scared. But I am slowly working through those thoughts, and I am considering getting back on medication because of my career and what I do. I'm just like really taking my time to really do some research. And also there has been some research that has come out that has stated that some of the medicine for ADHD is causing people to have heart problems, and that is something that I don't really want to mess with. So yeah, but after I was diagnosed with ADHD and the initial shock wore off, I was able to find people and communities that were also having ADHD and get some help. And it's amazing how God works because I feel like He really introduced me to these people. In the span of me finding out that I had ADHD, I knew 3 YouTubers that I followed who also came out and said that they were diagnosed with ADHD as well. And that was just so amazing to me because I felt so much less alone in that whole process. I am a person who has ADHD. I am not a ADHD person. I am working on compiling all my thoughts together actually to make a video about how being diagnosed with ADHD later on has affected my Christian walk. And I'm just trying to get all my thoughts together, so make sure you guys stay tuned for that. So that was my video about all of these symptoms that made me get checked out with ADHD. I feel like since I've got the diagnosis, I've had so much peace. And even though some days are hard, I've been able to find little things that I can do to support my body in this to make the process a lot easier to live through. And I just want to let you know that, like, if you are in your like 30s or 40s, or even if you're like in your 20s like me and you're just finding out that you might have ADHD or even autism, that this is a safe space for you, and you don't have to feel ashamed or afraid or sad even. But I would love for you guys to drop your experience down in the comments below, because I want to make this a really cool community of us people who are neurodivergent. I am super excited about today's inspiration station because I'm going to be talking about a YouTuber that I've followed for over 5 years. But before I get started, let me tell you about what Inspiration Station is. So if you guys have been following me since my 99.1 WQEE days, then you guys know that I used to do the Song of the Week. And so Inspiration Station is kind of like the Song of the Week, only I am sharing something that inspired me throughout the week that's not necessarily a song, so that you guys can check it out. Today's inspiration station is Bria Jones' Because I Love You podcast. Bria was one of those people who was with me, and she got diagnosed around the same time that I did with ADHD, only she was 30 when she got diagnosed and I was 23. And her podcast has been such a consistent thing in my life, and I find so much joy and happiness whenever I listen to her episodes because I can relate so much. You can find her on YouTube at Bria Jones, and you can find her on Spotify at the Because I Love You podcast with Bria Jones. And make sure that if you leave a comment, you let her know that Gabby from Singled Out sent you. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode today, and that maybe it was eye-opening for you in some way. Don't let anybody tell you that what you're experiencing and what you're going through is not real or that it's fake. If you feel that you didn't get the right diagnosis, go and get a second opinion. Yes, it might be a little bit more expensive, but you deserve to have peace of mind when it comes to your health. And I wish that I had got a second opinion when I had got that generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis, because I knew it wasn't correct at the time. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star, and also make sure that you press the subscribe button so you know when to come back for the next podcast episode. Anyway, I love you to the moon and back, and make sure you share the love of Jesus with one person this week. Bye!